Imagine standing in the sacred precinct of Nippur 4,600 years ago. The stone is cool beneath your feet, not from the weather. This is the deep, permanent cold of limestone, stone quarried before your grandparents were born. The air carries cedar incense, and something older, the dry mineral smell of clay tablets stacked in rooms sealed for decades. Somewhere deep inside the Apkallu, the great temple rising above the city like a stone finger, you can hear voices, low rhythmic chanting, less like prayer and more like reporting. A single oil lamp flickers against the wall beside you. In its warm light, you can see them. Thousands of tiny wedge-shaped marks pressed into wet clay and left to harden. Row after row, shelf after shelf. An archive that would take a lifetime to read. Here's the thing about these tablets. They don't describe a religion. At least, not in any way we'd recognize. Sit down and read the administrative records, the temple logs, the royal correspondence. What emerges looks remarkably like a surveillance system, the most detailed observation network the ancient world ever produced. And according to these records, one specific entity was assigned to this planet, not the heavens, not the underworld. This little blue planet, yours. His name, in the oldest written language we can still read, was Enlil. The tablets say he took his post 46 centuries ago, longer than the pyramids have been standing. And here's what keeps me coming back, what I can't quite let go of. Every text we've recovered, every administrative tablet, every hymn, every royal inscription spanning centuries, they all say the same thing. He never left. Tonight, we're going to find out why. If you're watching this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I made this. Maybe subscribe and let me know where are you right now and what time is it. Someone in Tokyo at sunrise. Someone in London just finishing lunch. Someone in Sao Paulo watching the sun go down. Someone in California at midnight lying in the dark wondering about the same ancient mystery. I always check the comments. Every single one. Now. Tonight we're going to read tablets that are 4,600 years old. We'll follow a surveillance network, from the temples of Nippur to the Ziggurats of Babylon, from the skies above Mesopotamia to the megaliths of Giza. We'll trace how that knowledge survived, through Persian fire temples, Greek mystery schools, medieval secret societies, all the way to the satellites orbiting above you right now. This is a long story, a very long story, and there's no rush. There never is, with stories this old. So, settle in, get comfortable, get the pillows right, let the blankets do their job. We're going way back to the very beginning of recorded history. And what we find there might change the way you feel about lying here in the dark tonight. Here's where we start. According to the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, the cosmos was divided into 3 domains. After the primordial order was established, 3 territories, 3 rulers, Anu received the celestial realm, everything above the atmosphere, the stars, the planets, the vast machinery of the heavens. Enki, sometimes called Ea, received the subterranean world, the deep waters, the aquifers, the places beneath the surface where, according to these records, different rules applied. And Enlil received Earth's surface and atmosphere. Everything you can see, everything you can touch, everything you can breathe, the rivers, the fields, the cities that would rise from the mud of Mesopotamia, the people who would build them. Here's the thing about this division. It reads less like mythology, more like a corporate territory allocation. Each domain had specific resources, specific responsibilities, specific reporting structures. The tablets describe regular communication between the 3 domains, status updates, resource transfers, intervention protocols, and Enlil's territory Earth came with something the other 2 didn't: a surveillance infrastructure. The Apkallu, his primary temple in Nippur, is described as having functions far beyond worship. The hymns speak of seeing stones, devices that could observe distant locations, wind listeners, detecting atmospheric changes across hundreds of miles, a communication system spanning all of Mesopotamia. Most archaeologists call these poetic metaphors, and they may be right, but the descriptions are oddly specific. They include operational details, procedures, maintenance requirements, the kind of granular, boring, bureaucratic detail that doesn't usually show up in mythology. Before Enlil took his post, there was a period the texts call the time of apportioning. The Atrahasis epic, predating the Genesis flood narrative by 1,000 years, describes this division in administrative language. Each domain received a designation. Each ruler received a mandate. Enlil's mandate was specific: maintain the balance of Earth's surface, monitor the beings who lived on it, intervene when certain thresholds were crossed. Someone, or something, was assigned specifically to watch over this little blue planet. Not surveillance in the cold, modern sense, something older, something that the tablets describe with a word we might translate as stewardship. We'll come back to that word. It matters more than it seems right now. I know how this sounds. Stay with me. The Sumerian king list is one of the most remarkable documents to survive from the ancient world. It's a sequential record of every ruler who held power in Sumer, stretching back, according to the text itself, to before the flood. Before the great deluge that appears in nearly every civilization's records. What makes the king list relevant tonight is not the kings themselves, it's the annotations. Besides certain rulers, the scribes recorded something unusual. Phrases that translate roughly to kingship was taken from a particular city and bestowed upon another, not conquered, not inherited, taken and bestowed, by divine decree. By Enlil's decision, the pattern is consistent across dozens of entries spanning centuries. A king rules, he has evaluated the records, use a word that could mean weighed or measured. And then kingship either continues or is transferred to a different city, sometimes to a completely different dynasty. Here's the thing about these annotations: they don't read like mythological embellishment, they read like performance reviews. And the evaluation criteria, when you piece them together from multiple tablet fragments, are oddly practical. Did the ruler maintain the irrigation systems? Did he provision the temples which, if our reading is correct, also served as surveillance infrastructure? Did he respond appropriately to atmospheric warnings? Because the temples weren't just receiving information, they were transmitting feedback, weather anomalies, crop failures, unusual population movements. All of it flowed upward through a network of priests who served as the ground-level sensors of this system. When the third dynasty of Ur collapsed around 2100 BC, the lament literature that followed is extraordinary. It describes the fall not as military defeat alone, but as a withdrawal of divine support. Enlil turned his face away. The atmospheric warnings, the crop predictions, the early alerts about hostile movements, they simply stopped. For the people on the ground, it must have been like losing power in a storm. One day the systems were working, the next, silence. And this is where our story becomes human. Picture a man, the tablets don't give us his name, 20 years of daily records, and his name doesn't appear once. But the records from Nippur tell us exactly what he did. Every morning before dawn, he climbed the Ekka's lowest observation platform. And we mean every morning. The logs are daily, without gaps, for years. 63 steps carved into the mud brick exterior. He'd done this so many times the steps had shallow grooves where his feet always landed. At the top, he stood in the pre-dawn dark and recorded 3 things: wind direction, cloud patterns, and any unusual atmospheric changes. He pressed a reed stylus into a small square of wet clay and made his marks, the same marks his predecessor had made, the same marks his successor would make for another century after him. The smell of wet clay in pre-dawn darkness. That's the detail that stays with me. We know from the tablets that they kept the clay in covered jars near the observation platforms, mixed fresh each evening. We know the styluses were cut from the phragmites reeds that grew along the canal behind the Ekka. We know the wind at that elevation carried sounds from the lower city. Dogs, the first merchants setting up stalls, the creak of water-lifting devices in the irrigation channels. This man, let's call him the priest of Nippur, because that's what he was spent 20 years recording weather patterns from a ziggurat platform. And here's the thing he never knew. His records weren't just religious devotion. They weren't just duty to Enlil. When you look at the full system, you realize something. His daily weather logs were collected, copied, cross-referenced with logs from dozens of other temples. compiled into summary tablets that moved up the administrative chain. He was a censor, one node in a vast network, and he had no idea. But here's where it gets really interesting, because the priest of Nippur wasn't alone. He was part of a network that, when you map it out, looks remarkably like a modern intelligence operation. Administrative tablets recovered from the city of Mari, a major hub on the upper Euphrates, reveal something remarkable, a system of regular reporting that connected dozens of cities across Mesopotamia. Each city had its designated observers. Each observer had a specific domain: agriculture, population movement, construction activity, atmospheric conditions, political developments. The reports followed standardized formats. Think about that for a moment. 4,000 years ago, in a civilization that still used clay as its primary writing medium, there were standardized reporting templates, header fields for date, location, and observer identity, body sections for current conditions and notable changes, summary sections for recommendations. Here's the thing about standardized forms: they only emerge when an organization reaches a certain scale of complexity, when the information flow becomes too large for informal communication, when someone at the top needs to process reports from hundreds of sources and needs them to look the same. The tablets from Babylon add another layer. They describe what appear to be long-distance observation tools, devices the texts call crystal instruments and storm mirrors. Now, mainstream archaeology interprets these as ritual objects, ceremonial items used in divination, and that's entirely possible, but the operational descriptions are oddly precise. Specific orientations, specific times of day for use, specific atmospheric conditions required for functionality. Different categories of observers handled different domains. Some tracked agriculture, crop yields, irrigation efficiency, the spread of new farming techniques between regions. Others focused on politics, alliances forming, tensions building, the movement of military forces. Still, others monitored what we'd now call technology, new construction methods, metalworking innovations, the development of engineering, all of it fed upward through the temple networks. Local priests compiled local reports. Regional centers, cities like Mari, Babylon, and Nippur consolidated regional summaries. And at the top, Enlil's administrative apparatus processed everything, more organized than most modern corporations. And this was 4,000 years ago. Our priest of Nippur, our unnamed weather logger, his daily records fed into this larger system. His wind directions and cloud patterns were cross-referenced with agricultural reports from the surrounding countryside. If his atmospheric data suggested an incoming drought, the temple administrators would adjust grain storage protocols. If his readings showed unusual patterns correlating with reports from other cities, that information would be flagged and escalated. He climbed 63 steps every morning before dawn. He recorded wind and clouds. He went back down. He had no idea what happened to his data after that. Close your eyes for a moment. Actually, keep them closed and picture this. You're inside one of those administrative offices in Mari. It's late afternoon. The desert light comes through a narrow window cut high in the mud brick wall. It falls in a single golden beam across the room. Rows and rows of clay tablets fill wooden shelving, each one a report from a different city. Some are still damp, delivered this morning by courier runners who crossed the desert at dawn. A scribe sits cross-legged on a reed mat, pressing a stylus into wet clay. The room smells of river mud and warm lamp oil, and the faint sweetness of the tamarisk wood used for the shelving. Outside, you can hear the distant braying of a donkey, the splash of water being drawn from a well, the evening call to the temples beginning. The scribe doesn't look up. This is routine. Another day, another report, another set of numbers from another city, joining the vast, quiet flow of information that has been running for longer than anyone in this room can remember. There's something almost peaceful about it. The soft scratch of reed on clay, the warm light, the systematic, patient, unhurried work of recording the world. And the structure of this network reveals something else, something that changes how you think about the entire system. The reporting wasn't just passive observation. The tablets describe feedback loops. When certain thresholds were crossed, the system responded. A drought, lasting longer than expected. A population growing faster than its agricultural base could support. a king making decisions that destabilize the region, not with direct intervention, at least, not usually. The texts describe changes in weather patterns, shifts in river levels, adjustments to growing seasons. If you read them as mythology, these are the gods expressing displeasure. If you read them as operational records, and I'm not saying you should, but if you do, they describe a calibrated feedback mechanism, input from the ground, processing at the center, output through environmental channels, and the priests on the ground logging their weather data every morning never realized they were recording the system's responses to its own intelligence. But the surveillance network had another layer, one that the tablets place not on the ground but overhead, the Atrahasis epic. And let me be clear, this is one of the most important documents in the history of human literature describes something extraordinary. A group of 300 beings called the Igigi, and their assignment was specific, sky-stationed monitoring. 300. The tablets give us an exact number. 300 dedicated observers, more than the entire staff of a modern embassy, more than the intelligence division of most contemporary military forces, positioned not in temples, not in cities, but across the sky, in a geometric pattern designed to provide continuous coverage of Earth's surface. Here's the thing about that number, it's not a round, mythological-sounding number like 1,000 or 10,000. It's specific, administratively specific, the kind of number that shows up in organizational charts, not in creation myths. The Igigi, according to the texts, had enhanced observation capabilities. They could monitor weather patterns across vast distances. They could track the movement of people and resources across the entire Mesopotamian plain. And this is the detail that scholars have debated for decades. They could influence atmospheric conditions, not control the weather exactly, more like adjust it, nudge rainfall patterns, redirect storm systems, the kind of fine-tuned environmental management that the ground-level priests would dutifully record in their morning weather logs without ever knowing the cause. Think about the scale of this for a moment. 300 sky-stationed observers, that's more personnel than most national weather services, employed until the 20th century. The Sumerians were describing a dedicated atmospheric monitoring force 4,600 years ago that rivals the staffing of a modern meteorological agency. Except unlike a modern weather service, this one could apparently do something about what it observed. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not claiming this is what actually happened. I'm saying this is what the tablets describe. And what they describe is worth paying attention to, because the level of organizational detail is unlike anything else in ancient mythology. These aren't vague stories about gods in the clouds. These are staffing numbers, positional assignments, and operational protocols. Scientists would call this a communication infrastructure, which is a fancy way of saying ancient cell towers across the sky. The Igigi tracked the spread of innovations between human communities. They flagged what the texts describe as accelerated development instances where human knowledge leaped forward faster than expected, and they reported everything back through a chain of communication that ran from the sky to the Ziggurats to the administrative centers on the ground. Our priest of Nippur, climbing his 63 steps every morning, recording wind direction and cloud patterns, the Igigi were part of what he was unknowingly detecting. Their atmospheric adjustments showed up in his weather logs as anomalies, unusual wind shifts, unexpected cloud formations, changes in humidity that didn't match the season. He recorded them faithfully, every morning, for 20 years. Now imagine looking down, not from a plane, from somewhere much higher, higher than the mountains, higher than the clouds. You're one of the 300, positioned somewhere above the Mesopotamian plain, at a height where the Tigris and Euphrates wind like silver threads through patchwork green. Below you the world sleeps. Cooking fires glow like earthbound stars scattered across the dark landscape. Silver threads of rivers catch moonlight. Fields stretch in geometric patterns. The irrigation canal's Suma's greatest achievement visible even from here as a precise grid laid across the earth. And somewhere in Nippur, in the pre-dawn dark, a tiny figure is climbing 63 steps to a stone platform, a priest with a reed stylus and a square of wet clay, beginning his 20th year of recording the wind. He doesn't know you're here. There's something oddly comforting about this image. In the vastness of cosmic time, In a universe of uncountable stars and incomprehensible distances, someone was assigned specifically to watch over this little blue planet, not to conquer it, not to exploit it, not to control it, just to watch over it, to keep count, to make sure the rivers run and the fields grow and the people building their small clay houses by the canal are safe enough to sleep through the night. That's not surveillance. Not in the cold, modern sense of the word. That's something older. Something closer to what a parent does, standing in the doorway of a child's room at midnight, just checking, making sure the breathing is steady, making sure the blankets haven't slipped. We'll explore what happened when this system was challenged and nearly destroyed in the sections ahead. But for now, hold this image. 300 watchers in the sky, thousands of priests on the ground, one system, and at its center, someone who never left. But the surveillance network had one more layer, the most intimate, the most human. The tablets describe 7 beings called the Apkallu, sages who operated not in the sky, not in the temples, but among the people themselves. According to the texts, they could assume the appearance of ordinary humans, merchants, scholars, traveling craftsmen. They move through Mesopotamian cities the way water moves through a canal network, present everywhere, noticed by no one. Think of them as ancient undercover agents with extremely long-term cover stories. Now, I want to be careful with this. The mainstream interpretation of the Apkallu is straightforward. They're mythological culture heroes, the 7 sages who brought civilization to humanity after the flood. That's the standard reading. It's reasonable. It may be all there is. But here's the thing about the Apkallu. They weren't just watching. They were shaping, gently, from the inside. The texts describe them training selected priests in specific practices, meditation techniques designed to enhance atmospheric sensitivity, dietary restrictions that, according to the records, sharpened the ability to detect subtle environmental changes, physical conditioning on elevated platforms, exposure to high-altitude atmospheric conditions for gradually increasing durations. The priests who completed this training received a designation that translates roughly as ears of Enlil. Human beings, trained by the Apkallu, embedded in temple networks across Mesopotamia, functioning as living sensors within the larger surveillance infrastructure. Our priest of Nippur, the unnamed weather logger, climbing his 63 steps every morning. The tablets suggest his daily routine wasn't just inherited tradition, it was methodology, passed down through a training lineage that traced back to the Apkallu themselves. He recorded wind direction and cloud patterns because someone, centuries before he was born, had designed that exact protocol. The reed stylus, the wet clay, the pre-dawn timing, the specific atmospheric observations, all of it calibrated, all of it intentional, and he had no idea who designed it. Or why. Close your eyes again. Picture a merchant arriving at a small city on the upper Euphrates, just as the sun is setting. The evening market is closing down. Merchants are folding their awnings, stacking their baskets of unsold figs and barley. The air smells of fresh bread from the bakeries. Warm, yeasty, the kind of smell that makes you hungry just imagining it. And cumin from the spice cellars, and underneath that, the dry, warm scent of the desert cooling down after a long day. Dust hangs in golden light. A donkey brays somewhere behind the grain storage. Children are being called inside. The merchant enters through the main gate. His robes are dusty from travel. He carries a leather bag and a walking staff. He looks like every other travelling merchant who passes through this city. He greets the gate guard, asks about lodging, mentions he's heading north, toward Harran. Nothing unusual, nothing memorable. But as he walks through the narrow streets toward the inn, his eyes are cataloguing everything. The new construction near the temple, the walls are thicker than standard residential building. The irrigation channel has been redirected. Someone has been expanding agricultural capacity beyond what the current population requires. The number of soldiers at the gate has doubled since his last visit. He'll record none of this in writing, but by the time he reaches the next city, the information will have entered the system. At least, that's one reading of these tablets. The mainstream interpretation is simpler. Mythology, culture heroes, foundation stories. But the operational details, the training protocols, the designation system, These are the kinds of details that make you pause, that make you wonder. Were the people who wrote these texts describing something they'd actually observed? Or something they'd imagined with remarkable specificity? 7 embedded agents, 300 sky station monitors, thousands of trained priests, and a network of ziggurats connecting all of it. Which brings us to those ziggurats, because they weren't what you think they were. Most archaeologists would tell you ziggurats were purely religious structures, temples built to honor the gods, places of worship and ritual, and they may be right. But here's the thing about these ziggurats. When you examine them as an engineer rather than as a theologian, something doesn't add up. Take Dur Kurigalzu, about 50 miles north of Babylon. Built around 1400 BC, the structure rises in stepped tiers, each level smaller than the one below, creating observation platforms at multiple elevations. Standard ziggurat design, religious architecture, nothing remarkable, except the acoustic properties are remarkable. Modern measurements of surviving ziggurat surfaces have revealed something unexpected. The building materials, a specific combination of sun-dried mud, brick and bitumen, create surfaces that resonate at frequencies corresponding to atmospheric disturbances. When weather systems approach, when barometric pressure changes, when wind patterns shift, the walls vibrate, not enough to feel with your hand, but enough to detect with sensitive instruments. The ancient builders somehow selected and combined materials that turned the entire structure into an atmospheric sensor. Now, that could be coincidence. Construction materials were limited in ancient Mesopotamia. Mud, brick, and bitumen were what you had. Maybe the resonant properties are an unintentional byproduct of the available materials. Entirely possible. But then you look at the design features. The upper levels of many ziggurats include what the texts call sky mirrors, polished stone surfaces, oriented at specific angles, and wind catchers, carefully positioned openings that channel and amplify airflow in measurable ways. These aren't decorative elements. They're functional, and their positioning follows patterns that correlate with prevailing wind directions and seasonal atmospheric changes across the region. Babylon's Etemenanki, the ziggurat that may have inspired the biblical Tower of Babel, contained hidden chambers, internal passages that don't connect to worship spaces, concealed rooms with no obvious religious function. And when researchers mapped the internal geometry, they found the chamber proportions corresponded to specific harmonic frequencies. Resonant chambers, built underground, in a structure supposedly designed only for prayer. Here's what makes this absolutely fascinating. Imagine standing inside one. The temperature drops as you descend. Cool stone walls press close on either side. The kind of deep, permanent cool that seeps into your skin and quiets everything. The air tastes of minerals and age, like breathing in centuries. Your footsteps echo in ways that don't quite match the space, the sound bending, redirecting, folding back on itself as if the walls are doing something with it. And then you feel it. Not a sound exactly, something deeper. A vibration that comes up through the floor, through the soles of your feet, through your rib cage, settling somewhere behind your sternum, like the building has a pulse, slow and steady and ancient. The darkness is complete, except for the faint scent of cedar oil drifting from somewhere below. And in that darkness, in that silence that isn't quite silence, you understand, intuitively, the way you understand that a room is safe before you've looked in every corner. This was not built for prayer. This was built for something else entirely. I know how this sounds. Stay with me. The electromagnetic properties of certain building materials used in ziggurats, particularly the magnetite-rich basalt found in some foundation layers, have measurable effects on local magnetic fields. Modern researchers have documented anomalous magnetic readings inside surviving ziggurat structures that differ significantly from the surrounding environment. Were the ancient builders deliberately selecting materials for their electromagnetic properties, or is this another coincidence in a growing collection of coincidences? We don't know. The evidence is suggestive, not conclusive. It may always be, but here's what we can say with certainty. Ziggurats were not simple temples. They were engineered structures with properties that go beyond anything required for religious worship. Properties that, if we take the tablets at their word, served a very specific function within a larger communication infrastructure. properties that our priest of Nippur would have experienced without ever understanding, climbing his platform every morning in the pre-dawn dark, feeling the stone vibrate beneath his feet, without knowing why. And the people operating within this infrastructure had titles. The tablets from Nippur and Babylon describe two categories of specialized observers. The terminology translates roughly to eyes of Enlil and ears of Enlil. The eyes focused on visual surveillance, monitoring physical changes across the landscape, construction activity, population movement, agricultural patterns, the size and direction of trade caravans, the kind of observation that today we'd file under signals intelligence. SIGINT. The ears focused on something different. Communication patterns, the movement of information between cities, political whispers, alliance negotiations happening behind closed doors, trade agreements with implications for regional power balance, what we'd now call human intelligence. HMINT. Each category had its own reporting chain. Routine observations were compiled at the local temple level, daily logs, weekly summaries, seasonal reports. The boring, repetitive data collection that makes up 90% of any intelligence operation. But when certain thresholds were crossed, unusual military movements, sudden population shifts, unexpected atmospheric anomalies, the reporting escalated, flagged for immediate attention, routed directly to Enlil's administrative center at the Apkallu in Nippur. Priority-based escalation protocols, 4,600 years ago, and the human element was built into the system from the ground up. The tablets describe how religious devotion functioned as motivation for the ground-level observers. The priests who maintained the weather logs, who tracked population movements, who recorded construction activity, they believed they were performing sacred duty, serving the divine order, honoring Enlil through faithful observation. And they were. They just didn't know what that service actually accomplished within the larger framework. Here's where it gets really remarkable. When you map out the entire system, Igigi above, Apkallu embedded, eyes scanning, ears listening, human informants feeding reports through the temple network, Ziggurats relaying information across hundreds of miles, you get something that looks almost identical to the organizational chart of a modern intelligence agency. The CIA has approximately 21,000 employees. Enlil's network, according to these tablets, at minimum 300 Igigi sky station monitors, 7 Apkallu ground-level operatives, an unknown number of designated eyes and ears, plus thousands of trained priests across dozens of city-states, all reporting to one entity, one command structure, one decision-maker, and the coded communication system. The tablets describe atmospheric signals used for secure information transfer between Ziggurats, specific pressure patterns generated at one location that could be detected at another. Think of it as atmospheric Morse code, encrypted in weather. Here's the thing: we didn't invent surveillance, we reinvented it. Every intelligence agency in the modern world, MI6, the CIA, Mossad, the FSB, follows an organizational logic that mirrors what these 4,600-year-old tablets describe. Overhead observation assets, embedded field agents, human intelligence networks, electronic surveillance, priority-based reporting chains, compartmentalized information flow. We think of surveillance as a modern invention, something that emerged with telescopes and telephones and satellites and server farms. But the tablets suggest otherwise. They suggest someone built the original system, and everyone who came after, knowingly or unknowingly, has been building variations on the same design. And at the center of that original system, maintaining it, directing it, processing the intelligence from 300 sky monitors and 7 embedded agents and thousands of human sensors across the Fertile Crescent. One entity, assigned to this planet. Ku. According to every record we've recovered spanning centuries of Mesopotamian history, never left. But the system was about to be challenged in a way that would change everything. The flood story. You know it. Everyone knows it. A great deluge covers the earth. One man builds a boat, saves his family, saves the animals. The waters recede. Humanity starts over. It's in the Bible. It's in the Quran. It's in the mythology of cultures on every inhabited continent. And most people assume it's either literal divine judgment, God punishing wicked humanity, or a metaphorical fable about obedience. Here's the thing, the Sumerian version says something very different about why. The Atrahasis epic, which predates the biblical account by at least 1,000 years, describes the events leading to the flood in administrative language. Not mythological, administrative. And the trigger was specific. The texts use a word that's usually translated as noise. The standard interpretation, humanity had become too noisy. The gods were annoyed. Enlil couldn't sleep, so he sent a flood. But here's what most translations miss. The Sumerian word rigmu doesn't just mean noise. In administrative contexts, it carries connotations of organized activity, commotion with purpose, the kind of productive disruption that comes from a population growing, building, innovating, doing things that weren't in the operational parameters. When you read rigmu as organized human activity rather than literal noise, the flood narrative transforms entirely. It stops being a story about a grumpy deity and becomes something else. The tablets describe specific triggers. Agriculture advancing to the point where human communities were becoming less dependent on weather patterns, less dependent on the atmospheric adjustments the surveillance system provided, permanent settlements growing beyond the surveillance footprint of the nearest temple, population expanding faster than the monitoring infrastructure could track. And then there's the Nephilim problem. The texts describe a faction of the Igigi, the sky station monitors who abandoned their posts. They came down. They integrated with human populations. They shared information that the operational protocols had classified as restricted. In modern intelligence terminology, they went rogue. 300 monitors in the sky, and some of them defected. The combination human activity exceeding surveillance parameters, rogue monitors compromising the system from within created what the tablets describe as a systemic crisis, a failure cascade. And the response was drastic. Nobody building those settlements knew what was coming. Nobody expanding their farms beyond the temple's line of sight suspected they were crossing a threshold. The families going about their daily lives, the merchants trading grain between cities that were growing too fast for anyone to track. They had no idea. And the arc, the one detail everyone remembers, reads very differently in the Sumerian account. It wasn't random mercy. The tablets describe selection criteria, specific lineages chosen for preservation, individuals who had maintained loyalty to the divine administrative structure, technical knowledge deemed essential for rebuilding the system from the ground up, not a lifeboat thrown to whoever could grab it, a calculated preservation of assets. Now, the mainstream geological interpretation of Mesopotamian flood accounts is regional flooding. The Tigris and Euphrates floodplain experiences catastrophic floods roughly every few hundred years. The archaeological evidence supports this flood deposits have been found at multiple Mesopotamian sites, dating to different periods. No single universal deluge. Multiple regional events remembered and combined into one cosmic narrative. Fair enough. That may be exactly what happened, but the Atrahasis text describes something oddly specific. Warning timelines, preparation protocols, the exact dimensions of the preservation vessel, post-event assessment procedures, the kind of granular operational detail that doesn't usually show up in flood mythology. Picture this. The water is receding. Dawn is breaking for the first time in, well, nobody kept count. The sky has a washed-out quality pale blue fading to white at the horizon like the atmosphere itself has been rinsed clean. The first birds are returning. Tentative. Uncertain. You can hear them before you see them, hesitant calls across the empty water, as if they're asking whether it's safe to come back. The air smells of wet earth and something indefinably clean, like the world just took a very long bath. And in the silence, absolute, ringing silence, the kind that only exists when everything that used to make noise is gone, one family stands on a mountainside, looking down at a landscape that's been reset. The cities are gone, the canals are gone, the temple networks, the administrative centers, the ziggurats that once relayed information across hundreds of miles, all of it submerged or swept away or buried under centuries' worth of silt. And somewhere, in whatever command structure survived the deluge, a decision is being made. Not to abandon the project, not to walk away from a failed system, not to cut losses and reassign resources to a different planet, a different territory, a different mandate. To start over. He didn't leave. After everything, the system failure, the rogue monitors, the catastrophic reset that wiped the slate clean, Enlil didn't leave. The tablets describe a post-flood period of methodical rebuilding, new temple networks, new surveillance infrastructure, new administrative protocols specifically designed to prevent the same failure from happening again. That's not the behavior of a distant overseer. That's not cold indifference. That's not bureaucratic obligation performed by someone counting the days until retirement. That's something closer to dedication, commitment, the kind of stubborn, quiet persistence that rebuilds what was lost because walking away was never really an option. And maybe that tells us something worth holding on to, here in the dark, at whatever hour you're listening to this. The post-flood world, according to the tablets, was different, more organized, more carefully monitored, as if someone had learned from the failure and redesigned the entire system accordingly. The Sumerian king list, the same document that tracked pre-flood rulers and their evaluations, resumes after the deluge, with a telling phrase, after the flood had swept over and the kingship had descended from heaven, kingship was reintroduced, systematically, city by city, dynasty by dynasty, a carefully managed reboot of divine governance. And the archaeological evidence from post-flood Mesopotamian cities shows something worth noticing. Urban designs change. Streets become straighter, sightlines become longer. Temple complexes are repositioned to central locations with clear views in all directions. The cities themselves, their physical architecture, become more surveillance-friendly. Now, urban planning evolves for many practical reasons. Population growth, engineering advances, administrative efficiency. There's no need to invoke divine redesign to explain straighter streets. But the timing, the consistency, the pattern across multiple independent city-states making similar architectural changes in the same era, suggestive. And then there's the Tablet of Destinies. The Anzu epic, another foundational Mesopotamian text, describes an object called the Tablet of Destinies. And this is where the narrative shifts from surveillance to something deeper, something that begins to answer the question we planted at the very beginning. Why did he never leave? Here's the thing about the Tablet of Destinies. It didn't just give Enlil authority over Earth's surface. It gave him an obligation he couldn't walk away from. A constitutional commitment. Cosmic law. The tablet bound its holder to maintain the balance of the territory assigned to them, monitoring the development of its inhabitants, adjusting atmospheric conditions, protecting the ecological systems that sustained life. Abandoning that territory, leaving it unmonitored, unmanaged, unprotected, constituted what the texts describe as the gravest possible violation of cosmic order. When a being called Anzu stole the Tablet of Destinies briefly, disastrously, the texts describe immediate atmospheric instability, weather patterns disrupted across the entire region, communication networks between Ziggurats failing, the surveillance infrastructure going dark, the feedback loops that had maintained environmental balance for centuries simply stopping, and the response from the divine administration was swift, absolute, and unequivocal. The tablet must be recovered. The system must be restored, at any cost. Because the alternative, a planet without oversight, without the calibrated adjustments that kept rivers flowing and fields growing and storms within manageable parameters, that alternative was unacceptable. Not because Enlil chose to stay, because the Tablet of Destinies meant he couldn't leave. Remember the word from earlier? Stewardship. We said we'd come back to it. This is what stewardship means in the Sumerian context. Not a favor, not a choice. A binding obligation written into the fabric of cosmic law. A commitment so fundamental that breaking it would constitute the unraveling of order itself. And the priests continued. After the flood, after the rebuilding, after the new temples were constructed, and the new protocols established, and the new monitoring networks calibrated and activated, the priest of Nippur's successors climbed the same platforms. Different men, different centuries, but the same ritual. Morning before dawn, wind direction, cloud patterns, atmospheric anomalies, pressed into wet clay with reed styluses cut from the same species of Phragmites reed growing along the same canal. The steps wore down. New steps were carved. Those wore down too. The ziggurat was rebuilt twice. 3 times each time on the foundations of the previous structure, and each time the observation platform was included. The same elevation, the same orientation, the same function, for centuries, without interruption. Somewhere in the administrative records from the Essene-Lhasa period, roughly 1900 BC, 700 years after the flood events described in the Atrahasis, there's a temple inventory that lists the supplies allocated to the Akkur's observation platform: clay tablets, reed styluses, covered storage jars for fresh clay mixed each evening, a wool blanket for the priest who climbed 63 steps in the pre-dawn cold. 700 years after the system was supposedly destroyed and rebuilt from nothing, someone was still making sure the observer had a blanket. As you lie here, perhaps starting to drift, that's perfectly fine. Let the story carry you. You don't need to remember any of this. The Ziggurats, the Igigi, the tablet of Destinies, the wool blanket, none of it requires memorizing. Just listen. Because the story isn't going anywhere. It's been waiting for 4,600 years. It can wait a little longer. And in the sections ahead, we'll follow this surveillance knowledge as it travelled. From Mesopotamia to Persia, from Persia to Greece, from Greece through Rome and into the candlelit scriptoria of medieval monasteries, we'll trace how the principles encoded in those clay tablets survived the collapse of every empire that tried to contain them. How the knowledge kept moving, kept being preserved, kept being passed from one generation of keepers to the next. But for now, hold this image. A planet being watched over. 300 monitors in the sky, 7 agents among the people, thousands of priests in the temples, a network of ziggurats humming with atmospheric information. And at the center, bound by cosmic law to stay, someone who never left. Here's where the story gets bigger than Mesopotamia. Because if this surveillance system existed only in the Fertile Crescent, only in the clay tablets of Sumer and Babylon, it would be remarkable, containable, a local phenomenon, a regional mythology with unusually detailed bureaucratic records. But it doesn't stay local. Göbekli Tepe, southeastern Turkey, discovered in 1994, and we're still trying to make sense of it. The site dates to approximately 9600 BC, nearly 12,000 years ago, 6,000 years before the oldest Sumerian tablets, 4,000 years before Stonehenge, and what the excavations revealed shouldn't exist at that point in human history. 16-ton stone pillars, carved with precision, arranged in concentric circles, decorated with reliefs of birds and serpents. And here's what makes the bird carvings particularly interesting. The birds are positioned looking downward, observing. The serpents coil upward, facing the same direction. Everything watches. 16 tons, the weight of 3 African elephants, carved and positioned by people who, according to the conventional timeline, were hunter-gatherers, without permanent settlements, without metal tools, without draft animals. And then you look further. Stonehenge, in southern England, built over roughly 1,500 years, starting around 3000 BC. The astronomical alignments are well documented. Solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles, but the bluestones, the inner ring, were quarried in the Preseli Hills of Wales, 150 miles away, each one weighing between 2 and 5 tons, transported across rivers, forests and hills to Salisbury Plain, 150 miles, without wheels, without roads, without horses. Newgrange, in Ireland, built around 3200 BC, older than the pyramids by 5 centuries. A passage chamber, designed so that on the winter solstice, and only on the winter solstice, a shaft of sunlight penetrates the entrance corridor and illuminates the inner chamber for exactly 17 minutes. The alignment is accurate to within a single degree. Someone calculated the sun's position at a specific date, centuries into the future, and built a structure to capture it. And Giza. We'll spend more time there in a moment. But consider this. The Great Pyramid's base is level to within 2.1 centimetres across 13 acres, 2 centimetres, the width of your thumbnail, across an area the size of 8 football fields. Now go further. Pumapunku in Bolivia, 15,000 feet above sea level, stone blocks cut with such precision that you can't fit a razor blade between the joints. The cutting surfaces show no tool marks, None. Modern stonemasons have examined these blocks. They cannot explain how the cuts were made with the tools supposedly available. Sacsayhuaman, near Cusco, Peru. Stones weighing up to 200 tons. Heavier than a blue whale, fitted together without mortar. Interlocking polygonal patterns that have survived centuries of earthquakes in one of the most seismically active regions on Earth. And then there are the structures that only make sense from above. The Nazca lines in Peru. Enormous geoglyphs etched into the desert surface, some stretching over 300 meters. A hummingbird, a spider, a monkey, geometric shapes and straight lines running for miles. Visible only from the air, created by a culture with no known aircraft. Designed for an observer who would need to be. Looking down. Submerged structures off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan. Stepped platforms that look uncannily like ziggurats. Now, resting beneath 60 feet of ocean. Dating is disputed anywhere from 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, when sea levels were lower and this seafloor was dry land. Similar anomalies in the Gulf of Campat, India. Mediterranean shelf formations that don't match known geological processes. If you placed every known megalithic site with astronomical alignments on a map, every stone circle, every precision-cut platform, every structure that shouldn't exist at the technological level of its builders, you'd get something that looks less like coincidence and more like a network with nodes. And here's the thing. Every one of these sites shares characteristics that echo what we found in Mesopotamia. Astronomical precision, acoustic properties, building materials with specific resonant qualities, construction techniques that exceed the supposed capabilities of their builders, as if someone or some system was deploying the same design principles across the entire planet, watching over all of it. Not just the Fertile Crescent. All of it. Let's go underground. The Ziggurat, our priest of Nippur's neighborhood, has been X-rayed using modern ground-penetrating radar, and the scans revealed hollow chambers inside the stepped structure, resonance chambers, spaces with no entrances and no exits, sealed since construction. When acoustic engineers modeled these chambers, they found something remarkable. The internal dimensions correspond to frequencies that match atmospheric pressure variations, the same kind of atmospheric sensitivity we discussed earlier. But is modest compared to what lies beneath Giza. The Great Pyramid, 2.3 million stone blocks, an average weight of 2.5 tons each, cut and placed with a precision that modern construction rarely achieves. And beneath it, carved from the living bedrock of the Giza Plateau, 2,400 cubic meters of limestone were removed. That's enough stone to fill an Olympic swimming pool. Removed from solid rock with a cutting precision of 2 millimeters. 2 millimeters, the thickness of a credit card. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted over the past 2 decades have revealed something else. Chamber networks beneath the plateau that don't appear on any official map. Passages connecting structures that, on the surface, appear unrelated. And beneath the Sphinx, beneath the most famous monument in the world, a sealed chamber, 9 meters by 12 meters, untouched. Unknown contents. The Serapeum of Saqqara, nearby, an underground complex containing massive granite sarcophagi. Boxes is almost too small a word, each one weighing between 70 and 100 tons. The internal surfaces are finished to a flatness of 0.05 millimeters. 0.05 millimeters. That's the width of a human hair, achieved on a 70-ton granite box. Underground, in near total darkness. Supposedly with copper chisels and stone hammers. Imagine descending beneath Giza. The passage narrows as you go deeper. Cool stone walls press close, not the cold of weather. The deep, permanent cool of rock that hasn't seen sunlight in 4.5 millennia. The air tastes of minerals and silence. You're torched because there is no electricity down here. There never was throws moving shadows across surfaces that are impossibly smooth. You reach out and touch the wall. Smooth. Under your fingertips, the granite feels like glass. No chisel marks, no abrasion patterns, no tool signatures of any kind. Just smoothness, as if the stone was poured rather than carved. And in the stillness, the kind of silence that has physical weight, that presses against your eardrums, you realize this chamber hasn't changed. Not in 4,500 years. The air you're breathing has been sealed here since the builders walked away. The stone beneath your feet has been waiting, patient, indifferent to centuries and empires and everything that happened above. The stone doesn't care about time. It just waits. And right now, as you're lying there, listening to this, someone in Buenos Aires just got to this part. Someone in Manchester is drifting off. Someone in Seoul is listening on their morning commute, standing on a subway platform, thinking about granite chambers beneath the desert. And someone, somewhere, is lying alone at 3 a.m, wondering about the same impossible precision. All of us, thinking about the same ancient mystery. All of us, being watched over. Here's the thing about these architectural anomalies individually. Each one could be explained. Coincidence, misinterpretation, a culture more advanced than we assumed. But when you line them up, Giza, Pumapunku, Sacsayhuaman, Göbekli Tepe, the pattern becomes harder to dismiss. The same precision, the same acoustic properties, the same materials selected for resonant qualities, the same care, as if whoever built these structures intended them to last forever, intended them to keep watching, long after the builders were gone. But the physical evidence is only half the story, because thousands of miles from Mesopotamia, in cultures that had no documented contact with Sumer or Babylon, people were recording something remarkably similar. The Indus Valley, Harappa, and Mohenjo-Daro, flourishing around 2600 BC, the same era as our priest of Nippur's daily weather logs, a civilization that served over 40,000 people, standardized urban planning so precise that the brick dimensions were identical across settlements separated by hundreds of kilometers, the same width, the same length, the same proportions, across a territory the size of modern France. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, a waterproofing system so sophisticated that it remained functional for 4,000 years. The bitumen sealant between the bricks is still intact, still waterproof after 40 centuries. Standardization at this scale requires central coordination, oversight, someone or something, ensuring consistency across vast distances. But here's what nobody tells you about the mythological parallels, because they're the part that makes you pause. In Hindu tradition, the Akashic records describe a cosmic archive, a surveillance system of all events, all thoughts, all actions, everything observed, everything recorded, not for punishment, for understanding. In ancient China, the Jade Emperor maintained a hierarchy of celestial watchers beings assigned to observe humanity and report back to the heavenly court. Their function was oversight. Their purpose, according to the texts, was maintaining balance. In Norse mythology, Heimdall stands eternal guard at the Rainbow Bridge, the watchman of the gods. His senses are so acute he can hear grass growing and wool growing on sheep. He never sleeps. He never leaves his post. And his purpose is not aggression, it's protection. And in Egypt, Thoth, the divine recorder, keeper of accounts, observer of all deeds, present at every weighing of the heart, every judgment, every transition, not as executioner, as witness, as the one who remembers, 4 traditions, 4 continents, no documented contact between them, and each one describes the same fundamental system, cosmic beings, assigned to watch over humanity, to observe, to record, to maintain balance, not to control, to care for. Coincidence is always an option, and it may be all there is. But coincidence stops being comfortable when it happens this consistently. When cultures separated by oceans and millennia independently describe the same hierarchical oversight structure, the same cosmic watchers, the same purpose, stewardship, not domination, as if the memory of being watched over is something woven into the human experience itself, something so old, so foundational, that every civilization that ever looked at the stars and wondered, remembered. But mythology fades, oral traditions drift, symbols lose their original meaning as centuries pile up like sediment. So how did the specific knowledge, the operational practices, the surveillance protocols, the architectural principles survive the collapse of Mesopotamian civilization? The answer is, it was carried, deliberately, through a chain of institutions that spans 2,500 years, 539 BC, Babylon falls to the Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great. The city that had been the administrative center of Enlil's surveillance network for centuries is conquered. The temples are occupied, the priesthood is displaced. But here's the thing, Cyrus didn't destroy what he found. The Persians were remarkably sophisticated conquerors. They absorbed, they preserved, they adapted. The Achaemenid Empire established a network of intelligence operatives with an official title that echoes across the millennia. The eyes and ears of the king, the same title, the same organizational structure, the same hierarchical reporting chain, as if someone had handed the Persians an operations manual and said, "Continue this." The Persian Magi, the priestly caste that maintained Zoroastrian fire temples, operated from elevated platforms with specific acoustic properties. Sound familiar? Their temples contained resonating chambers. Their rituals involved atmospheric observation. Their theology described a hierarchy of celestial watchers called Yazatas, beings assigned to monitor specific domains of human activity. When Alexander conquered Persia in 331 BC, the knowledge moved again, west, this time, into the Greek world. The Library of Alexandria became the next repository, and from there it flowed into the Greek mystery schools. Pythagoras, the mathematician whose theorem you learned in school, spent years studying in Babylon and Egypt before founding his school in southern Italy. His concept of the music of the spheres described celestial bodies producing harmonics that influence earthly events. Strip away the philosophy, and it reads like a description of atmospheric communication principles, vibrations, frequencies, resonance between separated points. The Hermetic tradition that emerged from Alexandrian Egypt codified a principle that would echo through 2,000 years of Western esoteric thought, as above, so below. A philosophical statement, certainly, but also, if you read it through the lens of what we've been discussing tonight, an operational principle. What happens in the sky station monitoring layer reflects what happens on the ground, and vice versa. When Rome absorbed Greece, the knowledge found new carriers. The Mithraic mysteries practiced in underground temples called Mithraea were popular among Roman soldiers stationed at the empire's borders. Military installations, with astronomical instruments, and underground chambers with specific acoustic properties. And then Christianity. When the Roman Empire adopted Christianity and the mystery schools were suppressed, the knowledge didn't disappear. It retreated into monasteries, into scriptoriums, into the patient, meticulous work of monks copying manuscripts by candlelight in cold stone rooms. The monks who spent decades transcribing ancient texts, Greek philosophical treatises, Persian astronomical tables, fragments of Babylonian administrative records, they didn't know what they were preserving. They thought it was theology, classical philosophy, historical curiosity. It was operational protocol, dressed in philosophical language, encoded in mathematical ratios, hidden in plain sight between the lines of religious commentary. If your eyes are getting heavy, let them close. You don't need to remember any of this. Just listen. The story carries itself. The priest of Nippur climbed his 63 steps every morning for 20 years. He didn't know what his weather logs were really for. The monks copied manuscripts for decades. They didn't know what they were really preserving. The pattern holds. Century after century, the knowledge moves through hands that don't understand it, protected by people who have no idea what they're protecting, as if the system itself, the watching over, includes a mechanism for its own survival. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed, and Europe descended into what we sometimes call the Dark Ages, not entirely accurately, but the knowledge infrastructure certainly contracted the manuscripts, found a new guardian, the Islamic Golden Age. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, founded in the 8th century, became perhaps the most important library since Alexandria. Muslim scholars didn't just preserve Greek and Persian texts, they translated them, annotated them, and cross-referenced them with their own astronomical observations. In many cases, they advanced the underlying science. Al-Kindi, Al-Battani, Ibn Sina. These scholars wrote about planetary intelligence within Islamic theological frameworks, celestial beings, with assigned domains and reporting structures. The language was different. The cosmological context was Islamic rather than Sumerian, but the organizational logic was identical. And in the city of Harran, in what is now southern Turkey, not far from Göbekli Tepe, a school of scholars claimed direct descent from the original Mesopotamian star worshippers. They called themselves Sabians. They maintained astronomical practices that, according to their own records, had been transmitted without interruption since the Babylonian era, an unbroken chain of observation stretching back thousands of years. When the knowledge moved back into Europe through medieval trade routes and the Crusades, it took on new disguises. Alchemy. The emerald tablet attributed to the legendary Hermes Trismegistus contains encoded astronomical and material science principles. They only become legible when you understand the original Mesopotamian context. As above, so below appears again, and again, a transmission signal repeating across centuries. The Knights Templar. After their founding in 1119, they built underground chambers with acoustic properties and astronomical alignments. When the order was suppressed in 1307, its members scattered, its assets seized. The knowledge didn't vanish. It migrated into the Rosicrucian tradition, into Freemasonry, into organizations that wrapped operational knowledge in layers of ritual and symbolism. Here's the thing about secret societies, and I know how that phrase sounds, so stay with me. They weren't keeping secrets for power, not most of them. They were keeping secrets because the knowledge was too specific to share openly, too easily misunderstood, too strange for the theological frameworks of their time. Masonic lodges were built with astronomical alignments. Their geometric designs encode mathematical relationships that trace back to Babylonian proportions. Their degree system ascending levels of knowledge, each revealing more than the last, mirrors the tiered access structure described in the Mesopotamian temple records. Apprentice, fellow, master. Not unlike local priest. Regional administrator. Ekur Command Authority. 2,500 years, from the fall of Babylon to the founding of the first Masonic Grand Lodge in 1717, through Persia, Greece, Rome, Islam, alchemy, and secret brotherhoods, the knowledge moved, changed shape, changed language, changed costume, but the core survived. The watching, the recording, the hierarchical structure, the acoustic chambers, the astronomical alignments, as if the system was designed from the very beginning to outlast any single civilization to keep watching over. No matter what happened above, the ancient system outlasted Babylon, Persia, Rome, and the medieval world. But then something happened that Enlil's original designers could never have anticipated. We built our own. 1909, London. The British Secret Intelligence Service is formally established. A hierarchical command structure. Regional operatives, specialized analysts, tiered access, centralized oversight. The organizational chart, when you lay it out, maps almost perfectly onto the Mesopotamian model. Sky-level overview, ground-level infiltrators, specialized eyes and ears, human informants motivated by ideology instead of devotion, all reporting upward through escalating priority channels to a single authority. No one designed it that way on purpose. No one in Whitehall was reading Sumerian tablets, and yet the structure emerged as if there's only one efficient way to watch over a civilization, and every system that attempts it arrives at the same architecture. The CIA, the KGB, the Mossad, the BND, every major intelligence agency on Earth, independently developed, uses the same tiered observation model carved into clay 4,600 years ago. Some researchers have noted something, and I want to be careful here, because this territory gets strange quickly. Unidentified aerial phenomena have been consistently documented over military installations, nuclear facilities, population centers, the 1,952 Washington, D.C. incident, the 1,967 Malmstrom Air Force Base event, where multiple nuclear missiles simultaneously went offline during a sighting, the 1,989 Belgian wave tracked on NATO radar, the 1,997 Phoenix lights witnessed by thousands. I'm not making claims, I'm noting a pattern. Objects, whatever they are, appearing consistently over the locations that a surveillance system would prioritize. military capability, nuclear arsenals, dense populations, the same categories the Mesopotamian texts describe as requiring elevated monitoring. Coincidence? Maybe. Maybe not. The honest answer is that we don't know, and that honesty, that willingness to sit with uncertainty, is more valuable than any premature conclusion. But here's the part that gets personal. Right now, your phone knows where you are. Your smart speaker is processing ambient sound. Cameras on street corners are logging your movements. Algorithms are predicting what you'll buy tomorrow, based on what you search for today. Facial recognition software can identify you from a satellite photograph. Your car reports your location. Your fitness tracker monitors your heart rate. Your email is scanned, categorized, and cross-referenced. We call this the surveillance age, the age of data, the age of information. But maybe it's not an age at all. Maybe it's just the latest version of something much, much older. Here's the thing: we didn't invent this. The tablets suggest someone else built it first. We're not pioneers, we're inheritors, catching up to a blueprint that was drawn before our civilization had a name. Those sealed chambers beneath Giza, those acoustic resonance spaces inside ziggurats that serve no apparent religious function, those astronomical alignments that no one needed for agriculture. Some chambers remain sealed, some questions remain open, but the system they belong to, the system of watching, recording, maintaining that system, never stopped. It just changed hands. We built satellites and servers and algorithms, but long before any of that, long before electricity, before writing, before cities, something was already watching. And maybe the reason we keep telling stories about it is because we remember. Here's where the evidence gets personal. Not personal in the surveillance sense, in the cultural sense. In the sense that every generation, across every medium, keeps telling the same story. And nobody seems to notice. The Matrix. 1999. A simulated reality maintained by machine intelligence that monitors and controls human consciousness. The most successful science fiction franchise of its decade. And audiences didn't just watch it, they felt it. Something about the premise resonated at a frequency deeper than entertainment. Orwell's 1984. Published in 1949. Big Brother, the all-seeing eye that never blinks. Telescreens in every room. Thought police monitoring not just actions but intentions. Orwell meant it as political warning, but the imagery he reached for the eye, the watcher, the inescapable observation is older than politics, older than England, older than written language. The X-Files, The Truman Show, Westworld, Black Mirror. Every few years, our most popular stories return to the same theme, the suspicion that someone, something, is watching, that the sky has eyes, that privacy is an illusion, that we've never truly been alone. But what if it's memory? The Urantia book, published in 1955, origin disputed, authorship unknown. It describes a hierarchical system of celestial oversight that maps, point by point, onto the Mesopotamian model. Planetary supervisors, assigned observers, tiered reporting, authored by someone or something that either read very obscure Sumerian scholarship or arrived at the same conclusions independently. What if the reason surveillance stories resonate so deeply is because some part of the collective human experience remembers, across languages, across generations, across every culture that has ever produced fiction? Not the details, not the clay tablets or the ziggurat frequencies or the Igigi grid patterns, but the feeling, the ancient, bone-deep awareness that something is paying attention. New discoveries keep expanding the evidence. Ongoing excavations at Göbekli Tepe continue to reveal structures that predate our understanding of organized civilization. Genetic studies raise questions about artificial selection events in human DNA. Electromagnetic surveys at ancient sites consistently detect anomalies in geometric patterns that shouldn't exist naturally. The questions aren't getting smaller, they're getting bigger and more specific and harder to dismiss. As you lie here, perhaps drifting between the ancient world and sleep, that's exactly where you should be. The boundary between waking and dreaming, the ancients believed that's where the watchers are closest, where the veil between observation and experience becomes thin. You don't need to decide anything tonight. You don't need to choose between coincidence and design. Just let the questions float. They've been floating for 5,000 years. They can wait one more night. Maybe the reason surveillance stories keep appearing in our fiction is because some part of us remembers, not with our minds, with something older, something that recognized the feeling before we had a word for it. Being watched over, the questions float, the evidence accumulates. And tonight, for the last few minutes of this journey, there's only one question left. The one we started with, 5,000 years and 100 minutes ago. So, after everything, after the clay tablets and the cosmic divisions, after the Igigi grid and the Apkallu infiltrators, after the Ziggurats humming with frequencies we still can't explain, after the flood and the rebuilding and the tablet of destinies, after Göbekli Tepe and Giza and Pumapunku, after Persia and Rome and monks copying manuscripts they didn't understand, after the CIA and the NSA and the phone in your pocket, after all of that, benevolent guide or controller, the convergence of ancient texts, archaeological anomalies, and contemporary phenomena presents a compelling case for something. But the honest answer, the only answer that respects both the evidence and the mystery, is that we don't know, and that not knowing is okay. It might even be the point, but here's what I keep coming back to. If those tablets are right, if something has been watching this planet for 5,000 years, what would it see tonight? Billions of lights, cities glowing like circuitry across continents, cars moving in patterns, planes crossing oceans, satellites tracing orbits that echo the Igigi grid, ships on dark water, trains threading through mountains, and somewhere in an apartment, a dorm room, a house with the lights off you, lying in the dark, listening to a stranger talk about ancient Mesopotamia, wondering, what would Enlil make of this? What would the system record? One listener, one night, one quiet act of curiosity about something that happened a very long time ago. The priest of Nippur climbed his platform every morning for 20 years. We never learned his name. The tablets don't preserve it. They preserve his function, wind direction, cloud patterns, atmospheric anomalies, recorded in wet clay before dawn, every day, in the shadow of a ziggurat that hummed with frequencies he didn't understand, and served a purpose he was never told. He didn't know what his weather logs were really for. He didn't know they fed into a network that spanned city-states. He didn't know that the system he served would outlast every empire in human history. He just climbed, every morning, before dawn, the smell of wet clay, the reed stylus between his worn fingers, the wind through the ziggurat levels. His successors did the same, for centuries. Different hands, same ritual, different names, all forgotten, same clay, same stylus, same pre-dawn darkness. And here's what I think about, lying awake at 3 a.m. The monks who copied manuscripts by candlelight didn't know what they were preserving. The Persian magi who maintained their fire temples didn't know what they were continuing. The Masonic lodges that encoded astronomical ratios into their architecture didn't know what they were echoing. None of them knew. And maybe that's the most beautiful part, that the watching over the stewardship continued through people who had no idea they were part of it, who just felt, for reasons they couldn't articulate, that some knowledge was worth preserving. Some rituals were worth maintaining. Some questions were worth climbing 63 steps in the pre-dawn dark to ask. Stewardship. That's the word we keep coming back to. Not surveillance, not control, not domination. Stewardship. The quiet, persistent, thankless act of watching over something because it matters. Because walking away was never an option. He never left. Not because he couldn't, not only because the tablet of Destinies bound him, but because if you read these tablets with an open heart instead of just an analytical mind, because he cared about this little blue planet, about the flickering cooking fires and the sleeping cities, and the priest climbing his platform in the dark, that's why he never left. That's why he rebuilt after the flood. That's why the system outlasted every civilization it was embedded in, because watching over something you care about isn't surveillance. It's a lullaby. Thousands of years later, people are still gathering at night to contemplate these questions. Tonight, that's us. Right now, someone on the other side of the world just pressed play on this same video. They're lying in their own darkness, in their own room, with their own version of 3 a.m. And someone else in a different time zone, a different language, a different life is about to fall asleep to these same words. All of us, connected across time zones and centuries, thinking about the same ancient mystery, the same clay tablets, the same unnamed priest, the same question that's been floating since someone first looked up at the stars and felt not alone. Thank you for being here tonight, for listening this long, for caring about something that happened 5,000 years ago to people whose names we'll never know. That curiosity, that willingness to lie in the dark and wonder, is its own kind of stewardship. You're keeping the question alive, just by listening. The truth is probably more nuanced than any single interpretation, but the evidence deserves our attention, and our wonder, and maybe, tonight, our rest. And maybe tonight, lying here in the dark, the idea that something ancient is still keeping watch isn't so frightening after all. Not surveillance in the cold, modern sense, not cameras and algorithms and data harvesting. Something older, something warmer, something more like a parent checking on a sleeping child, standing in the doorway, not to control, not to judge, just to make sure the breathing is steady, just to make sure the blankets haven't slipped. The stars outside your window tonight, if you have a window, are the same stars the priests studied from their platforms, the same stars the Igigi monitored from their stations, the same stars that someone somewhere is watching right now, from a perspective we can't quite imagine. The same sky, the same quiet, the same ancient question, drifting between the stars like a signal that never stops transmitting. Let your eyes close, if they haven't already. Let the questions float. They don't need answers tonight. They've been floating for 5,000 years. They'll still be there in the morning. The priest of Nippur climbed his 63 steps every morning. He recorded the wind. He pressed his stylus into wet clay. He didn't know why. He just knew it mattered. And tonight, lying here, listening to his story, you're part of it now. Part of the long chain of people who kept the question alive, who looked up at the sky and felt something they couldn't name. Something old, something gentle, something that's been watching over this little blue planet for a very, very long time. The oldest lullaby there is. Someone is watching over you. Sleep well.